The fluorescent lights of the diner flickered with a tired rhythm that matched my own exhaustion. I wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that night, the lemony scent of industrial cleaner mixing with the lingering aroma of coffee and fried potatoes. My lower back ached with that particular throb that came from 8 hours on my feet, made worse by the constant tension I carried home with me every night. "Juniper, table 6 needs a refill," called out Marcus, the night cook, his voice carrying through the serving window. I nodded, reaching for the coffee pot with hands that had developed calluses I never imagined I'd have. The diner's red vinyl booths and chrome accents looked shabby in the harsh overhead lighting, nothing like the cheerful retro aesthetic the owner tried to project during daylight hours. It was nearly midnight on a Tuesday, the deadest shift of the week. Only a handful of regulars occupied the scattered tables. Old man Vernon nursing his decaf in booth 3, the college kids cramming for exams in the corner, and the man in booth 7 who had been nursing the same cup of black coffee for over an hour. I'd noticed him the moment he walked in. It was impossible not to. He wore the kind of stillness that made the air around him feel heavier, more deliberate. His dark suit jacket hung on the hook beside him, leaving him in a white dress shirt with the top 4 buttons undone, revealing the column of his throat and the suggestion of defined collateral bones. A watch that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent caught the light as he turned his wrist to check the time. I'd been a waitress at Sal's Corner Diner for 3 years now, long enough to develop an instinct about people. This man didn't belong here. Everything about him spoke of controlled power, from the way he sat with his back to the wall, eyes constantly scanning the room, to the precise way he lifted his coffee cup. I'd learned to recognize danger in its various forms, and this man radiated it like heat from asphalt in summer. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I pulled it out discreetly, seeing Marlowe's name on the screen. My 6-year-old daughter, who should have been asleep 2 hours ago. "Mama, when are you coming home?" Her small voice crackled through the speaker, barely above a whisper. "Baby, what are you doing awake? It's late." I turned slightly away from the dining area, lowering my voice. "Did Royce put you to bed like I asked?" A pause. The kind of silence that made my stomach clench with familiar dread. "He's being loud again, Mama. He's angry about something." I closed my eyes, pressing my fingertips against the counter's edge until my nails went white. Royce, my boyfriend of 18 months, who had seemed like salvation when we first met. Someone stable, employed, interested in being a father figure to Marlowe. The mask had slipped gradually, revealing the monster underneath, piece by careful piece. By the time I understood what I'd invited into our lives, leaving had become dangerous. "Sweetheart, go to your room and lock the door, okay? Put your headphones on and listen to those fairy tale audiobooks Grammy got you. I'll be home in an hour, maybe less." I tried to keep my voice steady, maternal, hiding the terror that crawled up my spine every time I thought about what might happen in that apartment while I worked. "Okay, Mama. I love you. I love you more than all the stars, baby girl." I ended the call and stood there for a moment, gathering myself. The familiar ritual. Breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. Force the fear down into that locked box in my chest where I kept all the things I couldn't afford to feel during my shift. Rent was due in 6 days. We were already 2 weeks behind. One more complaint from Royce about my attitude or my hours. One more threat to kick us out, and Marlowe and I would be on the street. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was deep, controlled, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Urban, educated, but with rougher edges underneath, like gravel wrapped in velvet. I turned to find the man from booth 7 standing much closer than I'd realized, moving with that same eerie silence I'd noticed earlier. Up close, he was even more imposing. Tall, maybe 6'2" or 6'3", with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of cold slate. His face was all sharp angles and hard lines, the kind of handsome that made you nervous rather than comfortable. There was a scar, faint but visible, running along his jawline near his left ear. "Yes, sir. Can I get you anything else?" I asked, slipping automatically into my customer service voice, the one that hid everything real about me. "No." He studied me with an intensity that made me want to step back, but I held my ground. In my experience, showing fear only made things worse. "But I think you should know there's a child outside. A little girl. She's been standing by the door for the past 5 minutes." My blood turned to ice. "What?" I was moving before he finished speaking, rushing past him toward the diner's entrance. Through the plate glass windows, illuminated by the neon open sign, stood Marlo. She wore her unicorn pajamas and the pink sneakers she'd insisted on putting on herself this morning, laces untied. Her dark curls, so like mine, hung loose around her face. She was clutching her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hopscotch, against her chest with one hand. In the other hand, she held something I couldn't quite make out. I burst through the door, the night air hitting me like a slap. It was cold for October, and Marlo wasn't wearing a jacket. "Marlo, what are you doing here? How did you get here?" She looked up at me with those enormous brown eyes that could break my heart on a good day and shatter it completely on nights like this. "I walked, Mama. It's not that far." I remembered the way from when we came here for my birthday pancakes. "Baby, you walked? Alone? In the dark?" My voice cracked despite my best efforts. Our apartment was 6 blocks away. 6 blocks through neighborhoods that weren't safe for a grown woman, let alone a 6-year-old child in pajamas. "Where's Royce? Does he know you left?" Marlo's lower lip trembled. "He didn't notice. He was yelling on the phone and throwing things. I was scared, Mama. I needed to find you." I dropped to my knees on the cold pavement, pulling her into my arms. She smelled like the lavender shampoo we used and something else, something acrid that made my stomach turn. Cigarette smoke. Royce's cigarettes. He knew I hated him smoking in the apartment, especially around Marlo. It was just one more way he asserted his control. One more boundary he deliberately crossed. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay. You're safe now." I held her tight, feeling her small body tremble against mine. Over her shoulder, I saw the man from the diner standing in the doorway, watching us. His expression was unreadable, but something in his posture had changed. The dangerous stillness had sharpened into something more focused. Marlo pulled back slightly, looking up at me with sudden determination that seemed too old for her years. "Mama, I brought my piggy bank money. All of it." She held up what I now recognized as a small cloth bag, the one shaped like a ladybug that my mother had given her for Christmas last year. "It's $3. $3.17, actually." I counted twice. "Baby, why did you bring your piggy bank?" She looked past me, toward the diner, toward the man still standing in the doorway. Then she did something that made my heart stop. She walked past me, straight toward him, holding up her little ladybug bag like an offering. "Excuse me, mister," she said in that painfully polite voice children use when they're trying to be brave. "Are you a scary person?" I scrambled to my feet, moving to intercept her, but the man had already crouched down to her level. Up close, the size difference was almost comical. He looked like he could snap her like a twig, and yet something in the way he positioned himself seemed deliberately non-threatening. "That depends," he said quietly, his voice gentler than I'd heard it moments before. "Who's asking?" "My name is Marlo Hale. I'm 6 years old and I need someone scary." She thrust the bag toward him. "I have $3. Will you come to my house and scare away the monsters?" The man went absolutely still. Not the dangerous stillness from before, but something different. Something that looked almost like pain. His jaw clenched, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his face, there and gone so quickly I almost missed it. Recognition. understanding, memory. Marlo, sweetheart, this man is a customer. You can't just ask strangers to... I reached for her, but the man held up one hand, stopping me without touching me. What kind of monsters? He asked Marlo, his voice carefully controlled. The kind that yells and breaks things, she said simply. The kind that makes Mama cry when she thinks I can't hear. The kind that makes our apartment smell bad and scary. I tried to be brave, but I can't scare them away by myself. I'm too small. But you look like you could scare anything. The silence that followed felt like it stretched for hours. The man stared at Marlo with an expression I couldn't read, something between devastation and fury, neither of which seemed directed at her. Finally, he reached out and gently closed her small fingers around the ladybug bag. Keep your money, he said quietly. Tell me your address. You can't be serious, I said, finding my voice. Look, thank you for telling me she was here, but we don't need... Yes, you do. He stood, his full height making me crane my neck to meet his eyes. Those gray eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. You know you do. Otherwise your daughter wouldn't be standing outside a diner at midnight offering her life savings to a stranger. He wasn't wrong. God help me. He wasn't wrong. And the fact that he could see it, that this stranger could see in 30 seconds what I'd been trying to hide for months, made something break inside my chest. Who are you? I whispered. Someone who understands monsters, he said. Then to Marlo. What's your address, sweetheart? She rattled it off without hesitation, and I saw something change in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or something worse. I know that building, he said, still looking at me. I know that neighborhood. You're working here until what time? I don't see how that's... What time? I swallowed. 1 a.m. Marcus locks up at 1. He checked his watch again, that expensive piece of precision engineering that probably told him more than just the time. It's 12:15 now, 45 minutes. He looked down at Marlo. Do you think you can stay with your mama here for 45 minutes? Have some hot chocolate? Maybe some fries? Then I'll walk you both home. You don't have to do that, I said, but my protest sounded weak even to my own ears. No, he agreed. I don't have to. I'm going to anyway. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then looked at me again. My name is Thaddeus Crane. I'm going to step outside and make a phone call. When I come back, we're going to have a conversation, and then I'm going to make sure that when you go home tonight, the only monster in that apartment is me. There was something in the way he said it, something that made it clear this wasn't a figure of speech or empty threat. This was a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who had made and kept similar promises before. He walked past us, back into the night, phone already at his ear. I heard him speaking in low, clipped tones, but couldn't make out the words. Marlo tugged on my hand. Mama, is he going to help us? I looked down at my daughter's upturned face, at the hope shining in her eyes that I'd been trying so hard to keep alive despite everything. I don't know, baby. I don't know. But as I led her back into the diner's artificial warmth, settling her into booth 7 with the hot chocolate Marcus made without me even asking, I found myself hoping. Dangerously, foolishly hoping. Because Thaddeus Crane, whoever he was, had looked at Marlo like he saw something in her that mattered. Like he understood something about monsters that most people never learned. And God help me, I was desperate enough to let him prove it. Thaddeus returned 15 minutes later, sliding back into the booth across from where Marlo sat, her hot chocolate mustache making her look even younger than 6. He'd put his jacket back on, and I noticed for the first time the way it fit perfectly across his shoulders, tailored to accommodate what was clearly a powerful frame. He moved with the economy of someone who never wasted motion, every gesture purposeful. "Marlo," he said gently, "would you do me a favor? Would you draw me a picture of your apartment? Show me where your room is, where your mama's room is, where everything is. Can you do that?" She nodded eagerly, and he produced a small leather notebook and an expensive-looking pen from his jacket pocket. As she bent over the paper, tongue poking out in concentration, Thaddeus turned those slate-gray eyes to me. "Sit," he said quietly, gesturing to the booth seat beside Marlo. When I hesitated, he added, "Please." I slid into the booth, close enough to Marlo to reach her if needed, but far enough that I could watch both of them. Marcus caught my eye from the kitchen window, his expression questioning. I gave him a small nod. Whatever this was, I needed to see it through. "How long has Royce Drummond been living with you?" Thaddeus asked, his voice pitched low enough that Marlo, absorbed in her drawing, wouldn't overhear. "How do you know his name?" "I made a phone call. I know a lot of things now." He leaned back against the vinyl booth, but somehow the casual posture didn't make him seem relaxed. If anything, the looseness looked like a coiled spring. "I know he moved in 14 months ago. I know he's 43 years old, works sporadically in construction, has a sealed juvenile record and 2 DUIs. I know he was evicted from his last apartment for property damage. I know your lease is in his name, not yours. I know you make $9.50 an hour here plus tips, and that's barely covering the groceries, let alone the rent he's supposedly paying. Want me to keep going?" My mouth had gone dry. "Who are you?" "I already told you my name. What I do isn't relevant to this conversation." He glanced at Marlo, something softening in his expression before snapping back to that controlled hardness when he looked at me again. "What's relevant is what he does." "How long, Juniper? How long has he been hurting you?" I should have lied, should have deflected, made excuses, done all the things I'd gotten so good at over the past year. But there was something about the way he asked, not with pity or judgment, but with the flat certainty of someone who already knew the answer and was simply giving me the chance to confirm it. "He's never actually hit me," I said, the words coming out automatic, rehearsed. "He just gets angry sometimes, loud. He throws things, but not at us, just at walls, and he drinks, but he's been under a lot of stress and—" "Stop." The single word cut through my justifications like a blade. "Don't do that. Don't make excuses for him, not to me. I grew up with a man like Royce Drummond. I know exactly what he is and what he does. The fact that he hasn't hit you yet doesn't mean he won't. It means he's smart enough to know that visible bruises bring questions. But there are other ways to hurt people, aren't there? Other ways to make them feel small and scared and trapped." I looked away, focusing on Marlo's bent head, her small hand carefully sketching lines on the paper. "I'm saving money, as soon as I have enough for a deposit on a new place." "How much do you have saved?" The question felt like a trap, but I answered anyway. $460. "And how much is first month, last month, and security deposit in this city for a place that's safe enough for a single mother with a 6-year-old? I didn't answer. We both knew the number was somewhere north of $4,000, an impossible sum that grew more distant with every shift I worked, every bill that came due. Every time Royce made sure I knew exactly how much I owed him for keeping a roof over our heads. "I've been watching you tonight," Thaddeus continued, his voice dropping even lower. "The way you flinch when the kitchen door swings open too hard. The way you positioned yourself when I stood up earlier, putting yourself between me and Marlo automatically. The way you check your phone compulsively, like you're waiting for bad news. Those aren't the habits of someone who feels safe in their own home." "Look here, mister," I said, my voice shaking with something that wasn't quite anger but close to it. "I appreciate your concern, but you don't know me. You don't know my situation. You don't get to swoop in here with your expensive watch and your phone calls to whoever gives you background checks in 15 minutes and tell me what my life is like." "You're right," he said, surprising me. "I don't know you, but I know her." He nodded toward Marlo. "I know what it's like to be a child in a house where you're afraid to make noise, afraid to exist too loudly because you might set off the monster. I know what it's like to measure your breathing so you don't disturb the dangerous thing sleeping in the next room. I know what it's like to believe that if you're just small enough, quiet enough, good enough, maybe the monster will go away." Something in his voice made me look at him differently. The careful control, the way he'd crouched down to Marlo's level, the flash of pain when she'd asked him to scare away the monsters. This wasn't theoretical knowledge. This was lived experience. "How old were you?" I asked quietly. 5 when it started. 9 when it stopped." He looked at Marlo again, and this time I saw it clearly. The echo of recognition, the ghost of the child he'd been superimposed over the dangerous man he'd become. "She came to me because she's desperate, because she's tried everything else a 6-year-old can try, because she knows, somewhere in that brilliant, brave little heart, that her mother is drowning and she needs to find someone stronger than both of you combined to make the bad things stop." "Done," Marlo announced proudly, pushing the notebook toward Thaddeus. She'd drawn a surprisingly accurate floor plan of our apartment: the narrow living room, the kitchenette, the 2 small bedrooms, the single bathroom. She'd even labeled each room in careful block letters. "That's where I sleep," she said, pointing to one bedroom. "And that's where Mama sleeps. And that's where Royce sleeps when he's not in Mama's room." "Does Royce have his own room?" Thaddeus asked, studying the drawing with the intensity of someone analyzing a tactical layout. Marlo shook her head. "He keeps his stuff in the living room. His beer and his cigarettes and his tools and his clothes everywhere. Mama says we can't move it because it makes him angry." "I see." Thaddeus pulled out his phone again, took a photo of the drawing, then carefully tore the page out and folded it, slipping it into his jacket pocket. "You did a very good job, Marlo. Thank you." She beamed at the praise, then yawned hugely. "Mama, I'm sleepy." "I know, baby. We'll go home soon." I checked my phone. 12:45. 15 more minutes until my shift ended. 15 more minutes of this surreal conversation with a man who seemed to materialize danger and protection in equal measure. "I need you to make a choice," Thaddeus said, his voice still low but carrying an urgency that made my pulse quicken. "In about 45 minutes, I'm going to knock on your apartment door. When I do, one of 2 things will happen. Either you let me in, introduce me as a friend, and we have a conversation with Royce about his immediate future that doesn't include you or Marlo. Or you don't answer, and I go away, and you're on your own. But if you choose the second option, you need to understand something. The next time your daughter offers $3 to a stranger to scare away the monsters, that stranger might not be someone who gives a damn, whether she gets hurt in the process." The weight of his words settled over me like a physical thing. He was right, and we both knew it. Marlo's midnight walk to the diner hadn't just been dangerous. It had been a miracle that nothing worse had happened. The streets between our apartment and Sal's Corner diner weren't safe during the day, let alone at night. She could have been grabbed, hurt, killed. And she'd done it because she was 6 years old and terrified and out of options. "What exactly are you planning to do?" I asked. "Have a conversation. Make sure Royce understands that his presence in your life is no longer acceptable or sustainable. Ensure he leaves tonight and doesn't come back." Thaddeus's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went colder. "I won't hurt him. Not unless he makes it necessary. But I will make it very clear that continuing to live in that apartment, continuing to be anywhere near you or Marlo, is not compatible with his continued comfort or well-being. You're talking about threatening him, I'm talking about removing a threat from your life. There's a difference. He leaned forward slightly. Juniper, I could have your locks changed, your lease rewritten in your name, and a restraining order filed before sunrise. I could have $3,000 in your bank account by the time you wake up tomorrow. I could make sure Royce Drummond never so much as looks at you from across a crowded street. But none of that matters if you're not ready to let me help. So I need to know. Are you ready? I looked at Marlo, her eyes drooping with exhaustion, chocolate mustache dried on her upper lip, Mr. Hopscotch clutched in her arms. I thought about the past year, the gradual escalation of Royce's behavior, the way he'd started controlling the money, the lease, the decisions about what we could eat, where we could go, who I could talk to. The way he'd isolated us so carefully that by the time I understood what was happening, the walls of the trap were already built. I thought about Marlo walking 6 blocks in her pajamas because she was too scared to stay in her own home. I thought about the way she'd looked at Thaddeus, recognizing something I'd been too proud or too ashamed to admit. We needed help. Real help. The kind that couldn't be found in phone hotlines or women's shelters with waiting lists months long. What do you get out of this? I asked. Nobody does something like this for nothing. What's your angle? Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something I hadn't heard before. Not just control, but pain. Old pain, carefully locked away but never truly gone. When I was 8 years old, my mother's boyfriend broke my arm because I accidentally knocked over his beer. When I was 9, a man my mother owed money to came to our apartment and had a conversation similar to the one I'm about to have with Royce. He gave her a choice, pay what she owed or he'd take it out of her son. She chose to pay. The boyfriend left that night and never came back. The man who scared him away didn't ask for anything except that my mother get clean and take care of her kid. He paused. I'm not that man. I became something different. But I remember what it felt like to be saved. And I remember thinking that if I ever had the chance to do the same for someone else, I would. So that's my angle, Juniper. I'm paying forward a debt I'll never be able to fully repay. I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. 1 a.m., I said quietly. We'll be home by 1:15. If you're serious about this, knock 3 times. I'll answer. Something that might have been relief flickered across his face. Good. Until then, Marlo stays with you. Don't go home early. Don't call Royce to tell him you're bringing someone. Don't give him any warning. Understood? I nodded. Marcus called from the kitchen. Junie, you got 1 more table wants to pay out. Then we're closed. I stood, smoothing down my apron. I need to finish closing. Can you? We'll be here, Thaddeus said. He was already pulling out his phone again, typing with quick, efficient movements. Go. We're not going anywhere. As I moved through the last 15 minutes of my shift, mechanically processing payments and wiping down tables, I kept glancing back at booth 7. Thaddeus had pulled up something on his phone that made Marlo giggle, some kind of video that had her attention completely captured. He looked nothing like a father, all hard edges and controlled danger, but the way he made sure Marlo's hot chocolate stayed within reach, the way he listened when she chattered at him about Mr. Hopscotch's adventures, the way he made her feel safe enough to relax and be 6 years old, that spoke louder than appearances. At 1 a.m. exactly, Marcus locked the front door and dimmed the lights. You need anything, Junie? You want me to walk you out? No, I said, glancing at Thaddeus. We're okay. Thank you, Marcus. He looked between us, his expression concerned but not pressing. Marcus was good people. He'd covered my shifts when Marlo was sick, never asked too many questions. Always made sure I ate something during my break. You be careful, he said finally. And if you need anything, you call me. Don't matter what time. I will. I promise. Outside, the October air had grown colder, frost beginning to form on the cars parked along the street. Marlo was mostly asleep, resting against my shoulder as we walked. Thaddeus walked slightly ahead and to the side, positioning himself between us and the street, between us and the darker doorways and alleys we passed. I noticed he kept his right hand free, his left holding what looked like car keys threaded through his fingers like an improvised weapon. "You don't have to walk with us," I said. "We know the way." "I know you do. I'm walking with you anyway." 6 blocks had never felt so long or so short. With each step, my heart hammered harder against my ribs. What was I doing? Letting a stranger, a dangerous stranger who'd somehow gotten a background check on Royce in 15 minutes, a man who spoke about breaking bones and having conversations that made people disappear. What was I doing letting him anywhere near my home, my daughter? But then Marlo shifted in my arms, her small hand tightening on my shoulder, and I remembered. I was doing what I should have done months ago. I was accepting help. I was letting someone stronger fight a battle I couldn't win alone. Our building came into view, a 4-story walk-up that had been nice once, maybe 30 years ago. Now it was just tired, paint peeling, windows that didn't quite seal, heat that worked when it felt like it. Our apartment was on the 2nd floor, 2C. As we climbed the stairs, I could hear music playing too loud from 3A, the couple in 1B arguing through their paper-thin walls. Normal night sounds in a building full of people too poor or too tired to complain. I stood in front of our door, key in hand, Marlo heavy in my arms. The apartment was quiet. No light showed under the door. Maybe Royce had passed out. Maybe he'd gone out, though his car had been in its usual spot in the lot. Maybe this would be easier than I thought. Or maybe it would be worse. Thaddeus stood behind me, close enough that I could feel his presence, but not touching, not crowding. "Breathe," he said quietly. "Whatever happens in the next few minutes, remember, you're not alone anymore. You don't have to be scared by yourself." I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The apartment was dark except for the blue glow of the television, volume muted. I could see Royce's shape on the couch, a beer bottle dangling from one hand. He wasn't asleep. The way he sat, too still, too focused, told me he'd been waiting. "You're late," he said, his voice slurred but not as drunk as I'd hoped. "Where the hell have you been? And where's the kid?" "Right here," I said, stepping inside. My legs felt like water, but I forced myself to move, to claim space in my own home. "She's fine." Royce stood, swaying slightly. Even in the dim light, I could see the anger in the set of his shoulders, the way his hands clenched. "She better be. You know what time it is? I've been sitting here worrying, thinking something happened to you both, and you just—" He stopped mid-sentence as Thaddeus stepped into the doorway behind me. The light from the hallway illuminated Thaddeus fully, and I saw Royce's expression change from anger to confusion, to something that looked almost like fear. "Who the hell are you?" Thaddeus closed the door behind him, the soft click of the latch somehow more threatening than if he'd slammed it. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, conversational, and absolutely terrifying. "Someone who'd like to have a conversation with you, Royce, about your immediate future, and about how it doesn't include this apartment, this woman, or this child." I carried Marlo to her room while Royce and Thaddeus faced each other in the living room. My hands shook as I laid her in bed, still in her unicorn pajamas, Mr. Hopscotch tucked beside her. She was half asleep, eyes struggling to stay open. "Mama," she whispered, "is the scary man going to make the monsters go away?" I smoothed her dark curls back from her forehead, my heart breaking and mending simultaneously. "Yes, baby. He is." "Good." Her eyes fluttered closed. "I knew he would. He has the same eyes as me sometimes. The scared ones that pretend not to be scared. out of the mouths of children. I kissed her forehead and pulled her door almost closed, leaving just a crack so I could hear if she needed me. Then I forced myself to return to the living room, to whatever was about to happen. Royce had backed up against the kitchen counter, and I realized it wasn't because he was retreating. He was positioning himself near the knife block. Thaddeus stood in the center of the room, hands loose at his sides, completely still. The contrast between them was stark. Royce, all nervous energy and barely contained violence, like a dog backed into a corner. Thaddeus, utterly calm, like deep water that only looked still because you couldn't see how fast the current ran underneath. "I asked you a question," Royce said, his voice louder than necessary. "Who the hell are you, and what are you doing in my apartment?" "Your apartment," Thaddeus repeated, as if tasting the words. "Interesting. The lease says Royce Drummond, true. But you've been living here rent-free for the past 4 months while Juniper works herself to exhaustion, paying for groceries, utilities, and everything else. So I'm curious about your definition of yours." Royce's face flushed red. "That's none of your damn business. Junie, you tell your boyfriend here to get the hell out before I call the cops." "I'm not her boyfriend," Thaddeus said, "and you're not calling anyone." He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then turned it so Royce could see. "That's your bank account, the one you thought Juniper didn't know about, the one where your construction paychecks get deposited. $12,468. That's what you have saved while telling her you're broke, while making her split her tips with you for household expenses, while threatening to kick her and her daughter onto the street." The color drained from Royce's face. "How did you—" "I told you. I made some phone calls." Thaddeus pocketed his phone. "I also know about the warrant in Tennessee, the assault charge from 2019, the restraining order your ex-wife filed that's still active. Should I keep going?" I stared at Royce, ice spreading through my veins. Tennessee, ex-wife, restraining order, all things he'd never mentioned, never even hinted at during the 14 months we'd been together. "You're lying," Royce said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Am I?" Thaddeus took a single step forward. Just one. But something about the movement made Royce flinch. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack a bag tonight, right now. You're going to take your clothes, your tools, your cigarettes, and you're going to leave. You'll be out of this apartment in 30 minutes. Tomorrow morning, you'll go to the bank, withdraw $5,000, and have it transferred to an account I'm going to provide. Consider it back rent and damages." Royce laughed, but it sounded forced, panicked. "And if I don't, you think you can just walk in here and—" "If you don't," Thaddeus interrupted, his voice dropping to something that made the hair on my arm stand up. "Then I make a phone call to a friend in Tennessee. Within an hour, there's a warrant out for your arrest for violating your restraining order. Within 2 hours, you're in custody. Within 3 hours, your ex-wife is being informed of your location. And from what I understand, she has brothers, several of them, who've been looking for you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Royce's eyes darted between Thaddeus and me, looking for an ally, an escape route. He found neither. "Junie, you're just going to let this happen? You're going to let this psycho threaten me in my own home?" I found my voice, though it shook. "It's not your home, Royce. It never was. And you're right about one thing. He is scary. But the difference is, I asked him to be. Marlo asked him to be, because we needed someone scarier than you." Something in Royce's expression shifted then, from fear to rage. He moved fast, grabbing for the knife block. But Thaddeus was faster. One moment he was standing in the center of the room. The next, he had Royce's wrist locked in his hand, the knife clattering to the floor. The movement was so smooth, so practiced, that it was over almost before it began. "Bad decision," Thaddeus said quietly. He applied pressure, and Royce gasped, dropping to his knees. Let's try this again. You're going to pack. You're going to leave. You're going to transfer the money. And then you're going to forget this address exists. Forget Juniper exists. Forget that little girl in the next room exists. Because if you don't, the next conversation we have won't be this pleasant. He released Royce's wrist, and Royce scrambled backward, cradling his hand. For a moment I thought he might try to fight, might do something stupid. But whatever he saw in Thaddeus's eyes convinced him otherwise. Fine, he spat. Fine, I'll go. But you're going to regret this, Junie. Both of you. The only thing I regret, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice, is not asking for help sooner. It took Royce less than 20 minutes to pack. He threw clothes into garbage bags, grabbed his tools from the hallway closet, snatched up his cigarettes and beer from the living room. The whole time, Thaddeus watched from his position by the door, silent and immovable. I stood by Marlowe's room, making sure she stayed asleep, making sure this nightmare was almost over. When Royce hefted his bags and moved toward the door, he paused, looking at me one last time. You think you're better off? You think Prince Charming here is going to save you? He's worse than me, Junie. I can see it. Whatever he is, whatever he does, it's darker than anything I could be. You're trading one monster for another. Maybe, I said. But this monster answers to a 6-year-old girl with $3, and that makes all the difference. Royce left without another word. The door closed behind him, and I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs, fading away. And then, silence. Real silence. Not the tense, walking on eggshells quiet that I'd lived with for months, but actual peace. I sank onto the couch, my legs finally giving out. The adrenaline that had been keeping me upright drained away all at once, leaving me shaking. Thaddeus moved through the apartment systematically, checking the windows, examining the locks, even looking under the sink and behind the furniture. Finally, he returned to the living room. He had a spare key hidden behind the bathroom mirror, Thaddeus said, holding up a brass key, and another in the kitchen taped under the microwave. He was planning his entrances. He pocketed both keys. I'm having your locks changed tomorrow. A friend owes me a favor. He'll be here by noon. I can't afford new locks, I said automatically. You're not paying for them. He sat in the chair across from me, and for the first time since I'd met him 3 hours ago, he looked almost human. Tired. The kind of tired that lived in the bones. We need to talk about the next few days. Royce isn't stupid. He's angry, humiliated. Men like him don't just disappear quietly, even when they know they should. You think he'll come back? I think he'll want to. Whether he actually does depends on how convincing I was tonight. Thaddeus pulled out his phone again. I'm going to give you a number. If you see him anywhere near this building, near your work, near Marlowe's school, you call it immediately, day or night. Someone will answer. Someone will help. Who are you? I asked again, the question taking on new dimensions. Really, because men who can get background checks in 15 minutes, who know exactly how to make someone disappear, who have friends who owe them favors at midnight, they're not just good Samaritans. Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying me with that same unsettling intensity. Finally, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You remember what Royce said? About me being worse than him? He didn't wait for me to answer. He was right. I'm not a good man, Juniper. I do things that would horrify you if you knew the details. I live in a world where problems are solved with money and violence, where loyalty is bought and sold, where mercy is a weakness to be exploited. I'm the kind of man mothers warn their children about. Then why help us? Because I remember being the child who needed help and didn't get it, not until it was almost too late. He looked toward Marlowe's door. When I was Marlowe's age, I would have given anything, everything, for someone to make the monsters go away. But nobody came. Nobody even noticed. I survived because I learned to become something harder than the things that scared me. I became the kind of person who could make other people afraid. He turned back to me, and I saw something in his expression that took my breath away. Not the controlled danger, not the cold calculation, but genuine, devastating pain. "I can't undo what happened to me," he said quietly. "I can't go back and save that scared little boy. But I can make sure that little girl in there doesn't have to spend the next 30 years trying to outrun her childhood. I can make sure she grows up knowing that monsters can be defeated, that help exists, that she's worth saving. So that's why I'm here. That's why I did what I did. And that's why I'm not going anywhere until I'm absolutely certain both of you are safe." I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me. Just let me help. That's all I ask." He stood, pulling a business card from his wallet and setting it on the coffee table. "That's my number. And on the back is the number for the account where Royce will transfer the money tomorrow. $5,000. That's enough for a security deposit on a better place, enough to catch up on bills, enough to give you breathing room. I can't take money from you. You're not. You're taking it from Royce. Back rent, remember?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Besides, I have more money than I know what to do with. It might as well go toward something good." He moved toward the door, and panic seized me. "Wait, are you leaving? What if Royce comes back tonight?" "He won't. He's too scared right now, too focused on licking his wounds." Thaddeus paused with his hand on the doorknob. "But if it makes you feel better, there's someone outside, watching the building. He'll be there until sunrise, just to make sure. Someone who works for you. Someone who owes me a favor, like I said. Don't worry about him. You won't even see him." He opened the door, then turned back one last time. "Lock this behind me, all 3 locks, and try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day, but it's going to be better than today. I promise." After he left, I did as he instructed, turning all 3 locks with trembling fingers. Then I moved through the apartment in a daze, seeing it with new eyes. How small it was, how shabby, how Royce's presence had filled every corner, his tools in the hallway, his beer bottles on the counter, his cigarette smell embedded in the furniture. Already, with him gone just 30 minutes, the apartment felt bigger. Lighter. Like I could breathe deeply for the first time in months. I checked on Marlowe. She was sound asleep, Mr. Hopscotch tucked under her chin, her face peaceful in the way children's faces are when they feel safe. I stood in her doorway for a long time, watching her breathe, remembering the terror I'd felt when I saw her outside the diner. The 6 blocks she'd walked alone. The desperation that had driven her to offer her life savings to a stranger. She'd been braver than me. At 6 years old, she'd done what I should have done months ago. She'd asked for help. I returned to the living room and picked up Thaddeus's business card. Simple black lettering on expensive cardstock. Thaddeus Crane, followed by a phone number. Nothing else. No company name, no title, no indication of what he did or who he was. Just a name and a number. A lifeline. I turned the card over. On the back, written in precise handwriting, account number 4278856B, wire transfer only. Below that, almost as an afterthought, you're safe now. TC. I sat on the couch, still holding the card, and let myself cry. Really cry. Not the silent tears I'd learned to shed in the bathroom at work or in my car before going inside, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere I'd kept locked away. Relief, terror, gratitude, shame. All of it pouring out in waves that left me exhausted and hollow. When I finally stopped, when I'd cried myself empty, I realized something. For the first time in 14 months, I was alone in this apartment, and I wasn't afraid. Royce was gone. Really gone. Not just out for the evening, not just passed out drunk, but gone. And more than that, there was someone watching the building. Someone making sure he didn't come back. Someone who'd promised that tomorrow would be better. I believed him. I believed Thaddeus Crane, this dangerous man who spoke about breaking bones and making people disappear, who'd crouched down to Marlowe's level and asked her about monsters, who'd looked at my daughter and seen the child he'd been. I believed him because he hadn't asked for anything in return, hadn't made promises he couldn't keep, hadn't pretended to be something he wasn't. He was a monster, maybe, but he was our monster. The one Marlowe had asked for, the one who'd answered. I must have fallen asleep on the couch because the next thing I knew, pale morning light was filtering through the windows and someone was knocking on the door. 3 firm knocks. I jolted awake, my heart racing, before I remembered. New locks. Noon, Thaddeus had said. But when I checked my phone, it was only 8:30. I approached the door cautiously, looking through the peephole. A man I didn't recognize stood in the hallway, holding a toolbox. Late 50s, dressed in work clothes, with kind eyes. "Ms. Hale?" He called through the door. "Mr. Crane sent me. Name's Pete. Here to change your locks." I opened the door to the chain lock's length. He said noon. "Yeah, well, Mr. Crane called me at 6 this morning. Said it couldn't wait. I don't argue with Mr. Crane." Pete smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. "This'll take about 45 minutes. Then you'll have locks that actually work, and new keys. Just for you and your daughter. Nobody else." I let him in. While he worked, I made coffee and checked on Marlowe. She was still asleep, her exhausting night catching up with her. I didn't wake her. She could afford to miss a day of first grade. Today, she needed rest more than she needed to learn addition and subtraction. Pete worked efficiently, replacing all 3 locks with new deadbolts that looked substantial and serious. When he finished, he handed me 6 keys on a simple ring. "These are yours. Nobody else has copies. If you need more made, go to Hallstein's Hardware on 4th Street. Tell them Pete sent you. They'll charge you cost." He packed up his tools, then paused at the door. "Mr. Crane also asked me to check your windows, make sure they all lock properly, and to install a security chain that actually works, not that flimsy thing you had. Took me an extra 20 minutes, but it's done. You're secure now, Ms. Hale. Nobody's getting in here unless you want them to." "Thank you, Pete. How much do I owe you?" He shook his head. "Already taken care of. Mr. Crane pays his debts, and he takes care of people he's decided to take care of. You're in good hands, ma'am. Better hands than most people get." After Pete left, I tested all the locks. They were solid, substantial, the kind that made you feel safe just looking at them. I had 6 keys now. Keys that Royce didn't have copies of. Keys that belonged only to me and Marlowe. The simple weight of them in my palm felt like power. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but I knew who it was before I opened it. New locks installed. Security chain added. Windows checked. You're secure. Royce transferred the money this morning. It should show in your account by end of business today. $5,000 as promised. Use it wisely. If you need anything, call. Day or night. I meant what I said. You're not alone anymore. TC. I stared at the message for a long time, reading it over and over. $5,000. More money than I'd ever had in my life at one time. Enough to change everything. Enough to build something new. Marlowe emerged from her room, rubbing her eyes, Mr. Hopscotch dangling from one hand. "Mama? Is it morning?" "Yes, baby, it's morning." I scooped her up even though she was getting too big for it and held her tight. A brand new morning. the first morning of everything being different. Did the scary man make the monsters go away? I thought about Thaddeus's gray eyes, the way he'd handled Royce, the locks on the door, the money that was coming. Yes, sweetheart. He did. The monsters are gone. She wrapped her arms around my neck. Good. I knew he would. He promised. And he had. A man I'd met less than 12 hours ago, a dangerous man with secrets and violence in his past, had made a promise to a 6-year-old girl and kept it, had made the monsters go away, had given us back our home, our safety, our future. I didn't know what came next. Didn't know if Royce would try to come back, if Thaddeus's protection would hold, if this new beginning was real, or just another illusion that would shatter when tested. But for the first time in 14 months, I had hope. Real, tangible hope. And that, I was learning, was worth more than anything. The $5,000 appeared in my account at exactly 3:47 p.m. that afternoon. I was checking my phone compulsively, refreshing my banking app every few minutes like somehow that would make it happen faster, when the notification finally chimed. Available balance, $5,460.78. The $460 I'd managed to save, plus the $5,000 from Royce's account. I stared at the number until my eyes blurred. That was 3 months of rent in advance. Security deposit on a better apartment. Marlowe's asthma medication without having to choose between that and groceries. New shoes for both of us, the kind that didn't have cardboard stuffed in the soles to cover the holes. It was breathing room. It was possibility. It was the kind of security I'd forgotten existed. My phone rang, making me jump. Thaddeus's number, though I hadn't saved it yet. Did you get it? He asked without preamble. Yes, My voice caught. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. Good thing I'm not asking for thanks. I heard traffic in the background, the muffled sound of a car door closing. Have you thought about what you want to do? Stay in that apartment or look for somewhere new? I don't know. It's complicated. Marlowe's school is walking distance from here. My work is accessible by bus. If we move, I'd need to. Stop thinking like you're alone. He interrupted gently. You're not anymore. If you want to move, we'll figure out the logistics. If you want to stay, we'll make sure that apartment feels like yours again. But this is your choice, Juniper. Your decision. I'm just offering resources. I looked around the apartment. Without Royce's things everywhere, it looked different. Smaller, yes, but also more open. The smell of cigarette smoke was already fading, replaced by the lemon cleaner I'd used to scrub every surface this morning, while Marlowe watched cartoons. This place had been my refuge before Royce had moved in. Maybe it could be again. I think we stay, I said slowly, at least for now. Let Marlowe finish the school year. Give me time to save more, plan better. Smart. I heard papers rustling. I'm sending someone to install a security system tomorrow. Cameras for the hallway and parking lot, motion sensors for the windows. The monitoring will be professional, discreet. You'll have an app on your phone that alerts you to any unusual activity. That sounds expensive. It is. Fortunately, I can afford it. Thaddeus, I can't keep letting you. Yes, you can. His voice was firm, but not unkind. Here's what you need to understand. I don't do things halfway. When I commit to helping someone, I see it through. That means making sure you're actually safe, not just temporarily safe. Royce might be gone, but fear takes longer to leave. The security system isn't for him. It's for you. So you can sleep without checking the locks 5 times. So Marlowe can play without worrying about who might come to the door. He was right, and I hated that he was right, because it meant accepting more help, becoming more indebted to someone whose world operated by rules I didn't understand. What do you want from me? I asked quietly. Eventually, Because nobody does all this without expecting something. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I thought he might have hung up. Finally, what do I want? I want to know that 15 years from now, Marlo graduates high school without being afraid of her own shadow. I want to know that she doesn't grow up thinking the world is full of monsters she has to appease. I want to know that you get to live a life where you make choices because you want to, not because you're terrified of what happens if you don't. That's what I want, Juniper. Nothing more complicated than that. That's not realistic. People don't work that way. Most people don't. I'm not most people. He paused. I know this is hard to accept. You've been surviving on your own for so long that trust feels like weakness. But I'm asking you to try anyway. Not because I need you to, but because you and Marlo deserve to have someone in your corner. After we hung up, I sat with those words for a long time. Someone in your corner. When had I last felt that? My parents were dead, gone in a car accident when I was 23. No siblings. No close friends, because Royce had systematically isolated me from anyone who might have noticed what was happening. It had been just me and Marlo against the world for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have backup. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in months. Not on the couch where I'd been camping out to avoid Royce's increasingly aggressive attempts at intimacy, but in the bedroom that was actually mine. I locked my door, something I couldn't have done before without triggering Royce's rage, and felt the weight of that small autonomy settle over me like a blanket. Marlo had wanted to sleep in my bed, still rattled from the previous night's adventure, and I'd let her. We lay in the darkness, her small body pressed against mine, Mr. Hopscotch between us. "Mama," she whispered, "is the scary man going to come back?" "I think so, baby, if we need him." "Good. I like him. He listens to me like I'm important." Out of the mouths of children, seeing what adults missed. Thaddeus Crane, who by his own admission did things that would horrify me, who lived in a world of violence and power, had made a 6-year-old girl feel heard, feel valued, feel safe. "Me too," I said. "I like him too." The next 2 weeks passed in a strange state of hypervigilance mixed with growing peace. The security system was installed by a team of professionals who worked with quiet efficiency and didn't ask questions. Cameras covered the hallway outside our door and the parking lot below. Motion sensors on every window, alarms that would trigger if anyone tried to force entry. My phone had a new app that showed me real-time feeds and sent notifications for any unusual activity. The first few nights, I checked the app obsessively, expecting to see Royce lurking in the parking lot or trying the door. But there was nothing. Just the normal traffic of neighbors coming and going, the occasional cat crossing the lot, the mundane reality of a building where nothing threatening happened. Thaddeus texted daily, always brief. "Everything okay? Or need anything?" I'd respond with equally brief confirmations that we were fine, though the truth was more complicated. We were more than fine. We were discovering what normal felt like. Marlo went to school without me walking her there in a state of constant anxiety. I went to work without checking my phone every 5 minutes to make sure Royce hadn't done something to scare her. We existed without fear, and the absence of fear felt so strange I didn't know what to do with it. On the 15th day after Royce left, I was wiping down tables at the diner when Marcus called from the kitchen. "Junie, phone call for you. Says it's important." I picked up the diner's landline, my heart immediately racing. Nobody called me here unless it was an emergency. "Hello? Ms. Hale? This is Detective Sarah Chen with the city police. I need to ask you some questions about Royce Drummond." The name alone made my stomach drop. "What about him?" "He filed a police report this morning. Claims he was assaulted and threatened by an unknown male at your residence 2 weeks ago. He's saying you conspired with this individual to force him out of his home and steal money from him." Detective Chen's voice was neutral, professional. I need you to come down to the station to give a statement." My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. "I didn't assault anyone. Royce was living in my apartment. He wasn't paying rent. He was—" I stopped, not sure how much to say, how much might incriminate me or Thaddeus. "Ms. Hale, I'm not accusing you of anything, but this is serious. He's claiming someone threatened him with bodily harm, that money was extorted from him. I need to hear your side of the story. Can you come in tomorrow morning, say 10 a.m.? I agreed, because what else could I do? After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen doorway, my mind racing. Royce had gone to the police. He was fighting back, the way Thaddeus had predicted he might. And now there would be questions, official questions, about a night when a dangerous man had shown up at my apartment and made Royce leave through what certainly looked like threats and intimidation. I needed to call Thaddeus, needed to warn him, needed to ask what I should say, how I should handle this. But before I could pull out my phone, Marcus touched my shoulder gently. "Whatever's happening, Uni, you got people who care about you. Don't forget that." He pressed a business card into my hand. Different from Thaddeus's, this one had a woman's name, Rebecca Solis, attorney at law. "My sister. She does a lot of pro bono work for women in difficult situations. If you need a lawyer, call her. Tell her I sent you. She'll help." That night, I did call Thaddeus. He answered on the first ring. "Detective Chen," I said, without preamble. "Royce filed a report. They want me to come in tomorrow for a statement." "I know. Detective Chen called me 3 hours ago." His voice was calm, unsurprised. "I've already spoken to my attorney. She'll meet you at the station tomorrow morning, 9:30, before your appointment. Her name is Rebecca Solis. That's Marcus's sister. I know. I made some calls after I met you. Figured it was smart to have a lawyer lined up who already understood your situation, who you could trust." He paused. "Juniper, this is important. Tell the absolute truth. Don't lie. Don't embellish. Don't try to protect me. Rebecca will be with you the whole time. She'll make sure you don't say anything that could be used against you." "What about you? If I tell the truth, they'll know you were there, that you—" "I can handle myself. You focus on taking care of you and Marlo. That's all that matters." But it wasn't all that mattered. The thought of Thaddeus facing charges because he'd helped us, because he'd scared away the man who'd been terrorizing me and my daughter, made me feel sick. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "This is my fault." "No," he said firmly. "This is Royce's fault, and his miscalculation. He thinks the police will scare you, make you vulnerable again. He's wrong. All he's done is ensure that everything he did to you and Marlo comes out officially. Every threat, every instance of financial control, every time he made you afraid in your own home. It's all going on record now, and that record will make it a lot harder for him to pretend he was the victim." Rebecca Solis met me at the police station the next morning, exactly as Thaddeus had promised. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of her brother. She shook my hand firmly and immediately set about explaining what would happen. "They'll ask about the night Royce left. They'll want details about who was there, what was said, what happened. You tell them the truth. A friend helped you understand that Royce wasn't legally entitled to stay in your apartment rent-free, that he agreed to leave and to repay money he'd essentially stolen from you over the past year. You don't speculate about what might have been said when you weren't in the room. You don't assume anyone was threatened. You stick to what you personally saw and heard. But they'll want to know who the friend was. They'll ask about Thaddeus. And you'll give them his name if they ask directly. But you won't volunteer information. You won't describe him as dangerous or threatening. You'll describe him as someone who helped you understand your legal rights and ensured those rights were respected. That's all true, isn't it?" It was, technically. The truth, just carefully framed. The interview with Detective Chen was easier than I'd feared, mostly because Rebecca was there, occasionally stepping in when questions became leading or assumptive. I told the truth about Royce moving in, about how he'd gradually taken control of finances, about his temper, his drinking, the way he'd made me feel trapped. I told them about the night he'd been yelling, about Marlo walking to the diner because she was scared, about Thaddeus being there and helping me understand I could ask Royce to leave. And did Mr. Crane threaten Mr. Drummond? Detective Chen asked, her pen poised over her notepad. I wasn't in the room for most of their conversation, I said carefully. I was putting my daughter to bed, but when I came back, Royce was packing. Nobody was hurt. There was no violence. Royce left voluntarily. According to Mr. Drummond, he left because he was afraid for his physical safety. Mr. Drummond made me afraid for my safety for 14 months, I said, my voice stronger than I'd expected. He controlled the money, the lease, the decisions about my life and my daughter's life. He drank heavily, yelled constantly, made our home feel dangerous. I was terrified every single day. So if he felt afraid for one night, if he finally understood what he'd been putting us through, then yes, maybe that's what convinced him to leave. But that's not the same as being threatened with violence. Detective Chen studied me for a long moment. Ms. Hale, I'm going to be honest with you. The picture Mr. Drummond painted and the picture you're painting don't match. But I've been doing this job long enough to recognize when someone's been living in fear. I see it in the way you hold yourself, the way you automatically positioned yourself between me and that door when you sat down. I see it in your daughter's intake forms from school, the ones that note she's been anxious, having trouble concentrating, asking the nurse if she can stay in the office during recess because she doesn't feel safe. My throat tightened. I hadn't known Marlo had been talking to the school nurse. I'm going to look into Mr. Drummond's claims, Detective Chen continued, but I'm also going to look into Mr. Drummond's history, the restraining order in Tennessee, the assault charge, the pattern, and then we'll see whose story holds up better. After we left the station, Rebecca walked me to my car. You did well in there. You told the truth without incriminating yourself or Thaddeus. Detective Chen is smart. She'll figure out what really happened, and Royce's complaint will likely go nowhere. And if it doesn't? If they decide to press charges against Thaddeus? Rebecca smiled slightly. Thaddeus Crane has very good lawyers. The best, actually. He'll be fine. You focus on rebuilding your life. That's what he wants. I drove to work in a daze, my mind spinning. Everything Thaddeus had said was coming true. Royce had tried to fight back, and it had backfired. His attempt to use the police as a weapon was exposing his own behavior instead. But the fact remained that Thaddeus had helped me, had put himself at risk, and was now dealing with a police investigation because of it. That night, after my shift ended and Marlo was asleep, I texted him. I'm sorry about the police. I'm sorry you're dealing with this because you helped us. His response came immediately. Don't apologize for someone else's actions. Royce chose to file a false report. That's on him, not you. How did it go with Detective Chen? I told him everything, every question, every answer, how Rebecca had guided me through it. When I finished, he sent one more message. You did good. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be better. And somehow, impossibly, I believed him. Because every day so far had been better than the one before. Every day without Royce was a day where I could breathe a little easier, where Marlo smiled a little more freely, where our apartment felt a little more like home. Thaddeus Crane had promised to make the monsters go away, and he had. But what I was starting to realize was that he'd done something more important than that. He'd shown me that I could be strong enough to keep them away myself. 3 weeks after Royce's police complaint went nowhere, Thaddeus showed up at the diner during my shift. I saw him through the serving window before he noticed me, sitting in the same booth 7 where this had all started. My heart did something complicated. a flutter that wasn't quite fear but wasn't simple either. "Your boyfriend's here," Sophia said, sidling up beside me with a knowing smirk. She was new, hired after the previous waitress quit, and had immediately decided that Thaddeus's occasional appearances at the diner meant something romantic. "He's not my boyfriend." "Uh-huh, sure, and I'm not working this dead-end job to pay off student loans." She bumped my hip with hers. "Girl, that man looks at you like you're the only person in the room. If he's not your boyfriend, he wants to be." I didn't dignify that with a response. I grabbed the coffee pot and headed to booth 7, trying to ignore how my hands wanted to shake. The truth was, I didn't know what Thaddeus Crane was to me. Savior seemed too dramatic. Friend seemed too casual for someone who'd changed my entire life. Protector was accurate, but felt incomplete. "Coffee?" I asked, stopping beside his table. He looked up from his phone, and something in his expression shifted when he saw me. "Please, and whatever Marlowe likes. I'm picking her up from school today." My hand did shake then, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim of the cup. "What? Why?" "Because you work until 6, and after-school care lets out at 5:30, which means she walks home alone for 30 minutes every day. That stops today." He said it calmly, like he wasn't just casually reorganizing my childcare arrangements. "I've already cleared it with the school. I'm now listed as an authorized pickup. They confirmed it with you this morning via email." I stared at him. "I didn't get any email." "Check your phone." I pulled it out with my free hand, still holding the coffee pot in the other. Sure enough, there was an email from Marlowe's school, time-stamped 7:42 a.m., asking me to confirm authorization for Thaddeus Crane to pick up Marlowe Hale. There was even a link to click for approval. I definitely hadn't seen this email. "I don't remember approving this." "You did, at 7:47 a.m. He raised an eyebrow. "Unless someone else has access to your email?" I had a vague memory of being half asleep this morning, checking my phone in bed, clicking through notifications without really reading them. "You couldn't have just asked me?" "I am asking you. Right now. I'm asking if you trust me to pick up your daughter from school, take her for ice cream or to the park, and bring her home safely by 5:30 so you can finish your shift without worrying." "Why would you do that?" "Because I can. Because it helps you. Because Marlowe deserves to have someone who shows up for her reliably." He paused. "And because I want to." The simple honesty of that last statement undid something in my chest. "You want to spend time with my 6-year-old daughter." "I do. She's smart, funny, brave as hell. She reminds me that not all kids grow up afraid, that some of them get to be saved before the damage sets too deep. Spending time with her makes me remember why I bother doing what I do." I set the coffee pot down on the table before I dropped it. "Thaddeus, you don't owe us this. You've already done so much. The locks, the security system, the money, dealing with the police. You don't need to become a part of our daily lives." "What if I want to be?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to examine. Before I could respond, Marcus called from the kitchen that table 3 needed their order. "I have to work," I said, grabbing the coffee pot. "If you're serious about this, about picking up Marlowe, she gets out at 3. Her classroom is B7. She'll probably be excited to see you. She talks about you constantly." Something in Thaddeus's expression softened. "Does she?" "She calls you the scary man who isn't scary to us. It's her highest form of praise." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from dangerous to something almost gentle. "I'll be there at 3. I walked away before I could say something stupid, like that watching him smile made me feel things I had no business feeling about a man I barely knew. A man who'd entered my life through violence and control, even if it had been violence and control directed at protecting me. That afternoon, I left work early, claiming a headache so I could be home when Thaddeus brought Marlowe back. I told myself it was because I needed to see this with my own eyes, needed to confirm that he was actually safe with my daughter. The truth was more complicated. They arrived at 5:15, Marlo chattering excitedly as they came up the stairs. I heard her voice before I saw them, telling some elaborate story about her friend Emma and a playground incident involving a lost tooth. And then Emma said her mom was going to take her tooth and give her $5 whole. But I told her about how you gave me my $3 back, and how that was even better, because it meant I got to keep my money and get help too. And Emma said that sounded like magic, and I said maybe it was. And they appeared at the top of the stairs, Marlo holding Thaddeus's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, chattering away while he listened with what appeared to be genuine interest. He was carrying her backpack in his other hand, and what looked like a stuffed animal I didn't recognize. "Mama!" Marlo ran to me, throwing her arms around my waist. "Mr. Thaddeus took me to the park and we fed the ducks and he got me this." She held up the stuffed animal, a duck with a goofy expression. "His name is Quackers." "It's nice to meet Quackers," I said, then looked at Thaddeus. "Thank you for picking her up." "My pleasure." He set Marlo's backpack down inside the door. "She has homework, math worksheet and spelling words. We went over them at the park. She's got most of it done." Of course he'd helped her with homework. Of course he'd made sure she was ahead rather than behind. "Can Mr. Thaddeus stay for dinner?" Marlo asked, looking up at me with those enormous, hopeful eyes. "Please. I want to show him my room and my drawings and Mr. Hopscotch." I should have said no. Should have maintained boundaries, kept distance between my life and Thaddeus's. But Marlo's face was so bright with happiness, and Thaddeus was looking at me with an expression that suggested he wanted to stay, but would understand if I said no. "Do you like spaghetti?" I asked him. "It's about all I know how to make. I love spaghetti." So Thaddeus Crane stayed for dinner in my tiny apartment, sitting at my second-hand table while Marlo showed him every drawing she'd made in the past month. He admired each one seriously, asking questions about her artistic choices, complimenting her use of color. He helped set the table when I asked, navigating my cramped kitchen without making it feel more crowded. He ate the simple pasta I'd made like it was a gourmet meal, complimenting the sauce I'd gotten from a jar. It felt domestic, normal, like this was something we did regularly, like he belonged here. In this space I was still reclaiming as my own. After dinner, while Marlo was brushing her teeth, Thaddeus helped me wash dishes. We worked in companionable silence, me washing, him drying, falling into a rhythm that shouldn't have felt so natural. "This was nice," I said quietly. "Thank you, for picking her up, for helping with homework, for staying. Thank you for letting me." He set down the plate he'd been drying. "Juniper, I want to talk to you about something." The serious tone made my stomach clench. "Okay. Royce's restraining order hearing is next week, the one his ex-wife filed. The judge is considering expanding it to include you and Marlo, given his pattern of behavior and his recent complaint. Rebecca thinks you should be there, to testify if needed about what happened. Will he be there? Royce?" "Yes. His lawyer is fighting the expansion, claiming he's the victim, that you and I conspired against him. It's going to be uncomfortable. But it's also going to put everything on public record, which protects you long-term." I nodded, trying to absorb this. "Will you be there?" "If you want me to be." "I do." The words came out more fervently than I'd intended. "I don't think I can face him alone." "You won't have to. I'll be there." He moved closer, and I was suddenly very aware of how small my kitchen was, how close we were standing. "Juniper, there's something else. Something I need you to know before this goes any further." "Further?" "This." He gestured vaguely between us. "Whatever this is becoming, You deserve to know exactly who I am, what I do. No more vague references to a world you don't understand. You deserve the truth. My mouth went dry. Okay. I run an organization that operates in the shadows of this city. We handle problems that the police can't or won't touch. We protect people who fall through the cracks of legitimate systems. We enforce consequences when the law fails to do so. What I do isn't legal. It's not always moral by conventional standards. But it's necessary, and I'm very good at it. You're telling me you're in the Mafia. I'm telling you I'm in a position of power within an organization that exists outside normal social structures. Calling it the Mafia is both too simple and too complicated. But yes, essentially. I should have been shocked, horrified. Should have asked him to leave immediately. But I wasn't, because I'd already known. On some level, from the moment he'd appeared in my life, I'd understood that Thaddeus Crane wasn't just a concerned citizen. His resources, his connections, his casual familiarity with violence and control, all of it pointed to someone embedded in the city's underworld. Why tell me now? Because if you're going to let me be part of your life, part of Marlowe's life, you need to know what that means. The risks involved, the complications. You need to make an informed choice about whether you want someone like me around your daughter. Someone like you protected her when no one else did. Someone like you gave us our lives back. Someone like me also deals with dangerous people, has enemies, could potentially bring those dangers to your door. I thought about that for a long moment, weighing the truth of his words against the reality I'd been living. There's danger everywhere, Thaddeus. Royce was dangerous, and he was just an angry construction worker with a drinking problem. You're dangerous, but you're dangerous on our side. I'll take that trade. You shouldn't have to make that trade. No, I agreed. I shouldn't. But I'm 32 years old, working minimum wage, raising a 6-year-old alone, living in an apartment I can barely afford in a city that doesn't care if I disappear. My life was already full of dangers I couldn't control. At least with you, the danger comes with protection. He looked at me for a long moment, his gray eyes searching mine for something I couldn't name. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who needed saving, someone fragile. He shook his head slightly. You're not fragile. You're strong as hell. You've been carrying impossible weight for years, and you're still standing. You don't need me to save you. You needed someone to clear the obstacles so you could save yourself. The observation hit harder than it should have, because he was right. Removing Royce hadn't saved me. It had given me space to remember who I was beyond the fear. Everything since, working, parenting Marlowe, reclaiming my home, it had been me. Thaddeus had just knocked down the walls of the prison. "Mama," Marlowe called from her room. "Can Mr. Thaddeus read me a bedtime story?" I looked at Thaddeus, raising an eyebrow. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said, already moving toward her room. I watched from the doorway as Thaddeus sat on the edge of Marlowe's bed, picking up the worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are from her nightstand. He read with the kind of attention that made the story come alive, doing voices for the characters, pausing to let Marlowe look at the illustrations, answering her questions about whether Max was brave or scared. "I think he's both," Thaddeus said thoughtfully. "I think brave people are usually scared too. They just do the right thing anyway." "Like you," Marlowe said. "When you came to scare away our monsters, were you scared?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I was scared I'd be too late. Scared I wouldn't be able to help. Scared you and your mom would get hurt. But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway." Marlowe nodded, satisfied with this answer. "That's what Mama always says. She says being brave means doing things even when you're scared. Your Mama is very smart." After Marlowe fell asleep, Thaddeus and I stood in the hallway outside her room. The apartment was quiet, just the sound of her steady breathing and the distant hum of traffic outside. "I should go," he said quietly. "Let you get some rest. Thank you. For today. For all of this." I paused, then took a risk. "Thaddeus, when you said you wanted to be part of our lives, did you mean as a friend? Or as something more?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I meant as whatever you're comfortable with. I know my world complicates things. I know you're still recovering from Royce, still figuring out what your life looks like without fear. I'm not pushing for anything you're not ready to give. But yes, if I'm being honest, I'd like to be something more than just the man who scared away your monsters." My heart was beating too fast, my palms damp. "I don't know if I'm ready for something more, but I know I want you to keep coming around. Keep picking up Marlo. Keep staying for dinner. Keep being part of this new life we're building. I can do that." He smiled slightly. "I'm a patient man, Juniper. I can wait." The restraining order hearing was held in a courthouse that smelled like floor polish and old coffee. I sat beside Rebecca Solis in the gallery, Thaddeus on my other side, his presence solid and grounding. Across the aisle, Royce sat with his public defender, refusing to look in our direction. He looked different than I remembered. Smaller somehow, less threatening in the fluorescent light of the courtroom. His hair was unwashed, his shirt wrinkled. The man who had controlled every aspect of my life for 14 months looked diminished, ordinary. The judge, a severe woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Winters, reviewed the case file with the kind of thoroughness that made everyone in the courtroom sit straighter. "Mr. Drummond," she said finally, looking at Royce over her reading glasses, "you're contesting the expansion of the restraining order filed by your ex-wife, Sandra Drummond. You claim that Ms. Hale here and Mr. Crane conspired to force you from your home through intimidation and threats. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." Royce's voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "I was threatened in my own apartment, told I'd be hurt if I didn't leave. They stole $5,000 from me. The $5,000 that Ms. Hale says was repayment for rent and expenses you failed to pay during the 14 months you lived in an apartment leased in your name, but financially supported by her." Royce's public defender stood. "Your Honor, the financial arrangements between my client and Ms. Hale are irrelevant to the question of whether Mr. Crane threatened him." "On the contrary," Rebecca said, rising smoothly, "the financial arrangements are extremely relevant because they establish a pattern of behavior. Mr. Drummond moved into an apartment with Ms. Hale and her young daughter, put the lease in his name to establish control, then systematically isolated them financially and emotionally while contributing nothing himself. This is textbook coercive control. And when Ms. Hale finally found the courage to ask him to leave, he claims victimization." Judge Winters looked at me. "Ms. Hale, please approach the bench." My legs shook as I stood, but Thaddeus's hand briefly touched the small of my back, steadying me. I walked to the witness stand, was sworn in, and sat down, very aware of Royce's eyes on me. "Tell me about your relationship with Mr. Drummond," Judge Winters said. "Start from the beginning." So I did. I told her about meeting Royce 18 months ago, how charming he'd been initially, how he'd seemed stable and interested in being a father figure to Marlo. I told her about the gradual changes, how he'd suggested putting the lease in his name because his credit was better, how he'd started drinking more, yelling more, how his temper had become something I walked on eggshells around. I told her about the fear, the isolation, the way he'd made me believe I couldn't survive without him. "And the night he left?" Judge Winters prompted. "Tell me about that night." I told her about Marlo walking 6 blocks in her pajamas because she was too scared to stay in the apartment. About meeting Thaddeus at the diner. About him insisting on walking us home, on having a conversation with Royce. "Did you witness Mr. Crane threaten Mr. Drummond?" No, Your Honor. I was putting my daughter to bed. When I came out, Royce was packing. Mr. Crane told me that Royce had agreed to leave and to repay the money he owed me. Did Mr. Drummond appear injured? Distressed beyond the normal distress of being asked to leave? He appeared angry, but not hurt. Royce's attorney cross-examined me, trying to make it sound like I'd orchestrated everything, like I'd brought Thaddeus to intimidate Royce. But every question just gave me more opportunity to describe Royce's behavior, his control, his drinking, the atmosphere of fear he'd created. When I stepped down, Thaddeus was called to testify. He walked to the stand with that same controlled grace, was sworn in, and sat with perfect posture, hands folded calmly in his lap. Mr. Crane, Judge Winters said, what is your relationship to Ms. Hale? We're friends, Your Honor. Friends who help each other deal with abusive partners? Friends who help each other when help is needed. Did you threaten Mr. Drummond? Thaddeus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I told Mr. Drummond that his presence in Ms. Hale's apartment was no longer acceptable. I explained that he was living rent-free in a space paid for by a woman he was terrorizing. I suggested he leave voluntarily and repay the money he'd essentially stolen. I also made it clear that if he returned, if he tried to continue his pattern of abuse, there would be consequences. What kind of consequences? Legal consequences, Your Honor. Restraining orders, eviction proceedings, charges of financial abuse. I offered to help Ms. Hale pursue all legal remedies available to her. It was masterfully done, every word technically true while omitting the implicit threat of violence that had hung in the air that night. Royce's attorney tried to push, tried to get Thaddeus to admit to physical intimidation, but Thaddeus remained calm, deflecting every attempt. Did you touch Mr. Drummond at any point during this conversation? Only when he reached for a knife from the kitchen block. At that point, I restrained his wrist briefly to prevent anyone from being hurt. Once he put the knife down, I released him. Royce's face had gone red. He's lying. He twisted my arm, threatened to break it. Mr. Drummond, Judge Winters said sharply, you'll get your turn to speak. But when Royce did testify, his story fell apart under scrutiny. He couldn't explain why he'd been living rent-free for months. Couldn't justify the financial control. Under questioning, it came out that he had previous complaints from other partners, that the restraining order in Tennessee had been filed after he'd damaged his ex-wife's property and threatened her. Judge Winters didn't need long to make her decision. I'm expanding the restraining order to include Ms. Juniper Hale and her minor daughter, Marlo Hale. Mr. Drummond, you are to have no contact with them whatsoever. No calls, no texts, no appearing at Ms. Hale's home or workplace. You are to stay a minimum of 500 feet away from both of them at all times. Do you understand? This is bullshit, Royce muttered, but his attorney elbowed him sharply. Do you understand, Mr. Drummond? Yes, Your Honor. Good, because if you violate this order, you'll be arrested immediately. This court is adjourned. As we left the courthouse, I felt like I could finally breathe, really breathe. Not the shallow, careful breaths of the past year, but deep, full lungfuls of air. Royce couldn't come near us now. It was official. Legal. Protected. You did well in there, Rebecca said, pausing on the courthouse steps. Both of you. The judge saw through Drummond's lies. You're safe now. Legally protected. Thaddeus shook her hand. Thank you, Rebecca. Send your bill to the usual address. After she left, Thaddeus and I stood there in the afternoon sunshine, neither of us quite ready to part ways. What happens now? I asked. Now you live your life. The life you deserve, without fear, without looking over your shoulder. What about you? Where do you fit in this life I'm building? He looked at me for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. Wherever you want me to fit. I meant what I said, Juniper. I'm patient. I can be your friend, your support system, someone who shows up when you need help. Or I can be more, if you ever decide you're ready for that. But there's no pressure, no expectations. I thought about the past 6 weeks, how he'd shown up consistently, picking up Marlo from school, staying for dinner twice a week, always asking what I needed, never demanding anything in return. How Marlo talked about him constantly, had started drawing pictures of him as one of her family. How I'd started looking forward to seeing him, started noticing the way his face softened when he smiled, started feeling something more complicated than gratitude. I think, I said slowly, that I'd like to try more. Carefully. Slowly. But more. Something shifted in his expression, the careful control dropping away to reveal genuine joy. Yeah? Yeah. But Thaddeus, you need to understand something. Marlo comes first, always. If this thing between us doesn't work, if it gets complicated or dangerous or wrong, I need to know you'll step back gracefully. Marlo will always come first, he agreed. I wouldn't have it any other way. And if this doesn't work, I'll step back. But I'll still be there for her. Because she's not just your daughter anymore. She's important to me. Separately. As her own person. That did it. Those words broke down the last of my resistance. I stepped closer, rising on my toes, and kissed him. Just a brief press of lips. Nothing dramatic, but it felt like a promise. Like the beginning of something I'd been too scared to hope for. When I pulled back, Thaddeus was smiling. Really smiling. Not the controlled version, but something genuine and warm that made him look younger. Dinner tonight? He asked. My place. I want to cook for you and Marlo. Show you that I can actually do more than just scare away monsters. You cook? I'm Italian. Of course I cook. So that evening, Marlo and I went to Thaddeus's home for the first time. Not the penthouse I'd imagined, but a converted warehouse in an industrial area that had been transformed into something beautiful. Exposed brick, soaring ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. It was massive, and somehow still managed to feel warm. Marlo was entranced, running from room to room, exclaiming over everything. Thaddeus gave her the tour, showing her his collection of books, his telescope positioned by the window, even his kitchen with its professional-grade appliances. You really do cook, I said, watching as he effortlessly prepared chicken piccata while simultaneously making pasta from scratch and keeping Marlo entertained with stories about learning to cook from his grandmother. I told you. Italian. He winked at me, and something in my chest fluttered. We ate at his massive dining table, just the three of us in that huge space, and it didn't feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something. After dinner, Marlo fell asleep on Thaddeus's couch, exhausted from excitement and a full stomach. Thaddeus carried her to his guest room, laying her down gently and covering her with a soft blanket. She can stay here tonight, he said quietly as we stood in the doorway watching her sleep. There's a room for you too if you want. No pressure, just an offer. I looked at Marlo, peaceful in this safe space, then at Thaddeus, this dangerous, complicated man who'd somehow become essential to our lives. We'll stay. That night, after Marlo was settled and the apartment was quiet, Thaddeus and I sat on his couch overlooking the city lights. We talked for hours about his childhood, about how he'd climbed from poverty and violence to build his organization, about my dreams for Marlo, for myself, about the future we might build together. I never thought I'd have this, he admitted, his arm around my shoulders, my head resting against his chest. A family, something normal, something good. We're not normal, I pointed out. No, he agreed. We're better than normal. We're survivors who found each other. We're people who understand darkness, but choose light anyway. 6 months later, Marlo started calling Thaddeus Dad without either of us prompting her. She just started, casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe it was. A year after that night in the diner, Thaddeus asked me to marry him, not with a dramatic proposal, but quietly, while we were doing dishes after dinner, Marlo's laughter echoing from the other room where she was playing with Quackers and Mr. Hopscotch. "Marry me," he said. "Make this official. Let me be Marlo's father legally, not just in her heart. Let me be your partner, your co-parent, your family." I said yes before he finished asking. We got married in a small ceremony. Just us, Marlo, and a few close friends. Marlo was the flower girl, taking her job very seriously, scattering petals with intense concentration. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Marlo raised her hand. "Yes, sweetheart," the officiant asked, clearly trying not to laugh. "I object to not getting cake soon. Can we do the cake part now?" Everyone laughed, and Thaddeus scooped her up, kissing her forehead. "Soon, princess. Let us finish getting married first." "Okay, Dad." And just like that, we became a family. Not a conventional one, not one that made sense on paper, but a real family, built on shared trauma transformed into shared strength, on a 6-year-old's bravery and $3, on a dangerous man who'd remembered what it meant to be saved. Years later, when Marlo was 16, and we were having one of those teenage fights that tested every parent's patience, she yelled at me, "You know what? I'm glad Dad found us, because you would have stayed with Royce forever if I hadn't gone to that diner." She stormed off to her room, slamming the door. Thaddeus, who'd witnessed the whole exchange, put his arm around me. "She's not wrong," I admitted. "She's also not right. You would have found a way out eventually. You're stronger than you think." "Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to do it alone." "You'll never have to do anything alone again," he promised. "That's what family is for." And he was right. We weren't just Thaddeus Crane's family. We were a unit, a team, a collection of survivors who'd found each other at exactly the right time. We were living proof that sometimes monsters can be defeated, that sometimes scared little girls know exactly who to ask for help, that sometimes $3 and immense bravery can change everything. Marlo never forgot the night she walked 6 blocks in her pajamas to find someone scary enough to chase away the monsters. Even as an adult, she told that story, about the bravest thing she'd ever done, about the night she saved herself and her mother by offering her entire piggy bank to a stranger who turned out to be exactly what they needed. You know what the scary man said that night? She'd say, years later, with Thaddeus sitting beside her, gray-haired now but still formidable. He said, "Keep your money." He didn't want anything except to help. That's how I knew he was safe, because monsters always take things. Heroes give them back. And every time she told that story, I'd look at Thaddeus, at this man who'd heard a child's desperate plea and answered it, who'd seen echoes of his own trauma and chosen to spare others that pain. This man who'd become my husband, Marlo's father, our family's foundation. "Thank you," I'd whisper to him, and he'd always answer the same way. "Thank you for letting me." Because in the end, that's what this was always about. Not about being saved, but about having the courage to accept help when it was offered. About a 6-year-old girl who'd been braver than any adult, who'd walked into the night offering $3 for safety, and found instead something priceless. A family that chose each other, healed together, and loved fiercely. Marlo had asked for someone to scare away the monsters. What she got was so much better. She got a father who would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. A mother who learned to be strong again. And a family built not on fairy tale perfection, but on real survival, real love, and real commitment to protecting each other from the darkness. Sometimes the best families aren't born. They're forged in moments of desperate bravery, in midnight diners, in the decision to ask for help when everything else has failed. And sometimes, just sometimes, the scary man turns out to be exactly the hero you needed all along.